Well, I am so pleased and honored to be here and that you're all here, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to speak with you all on the gift of sharing our stories. So that is our focus today, getting to know each other and the importance of relationship and the time that it takes to build those relationships. So let's begin with prayer. Gracious God, we are grateful for the gift of this day, and we're grateful for the gift of this fall season. We are grateful for the gift of story. We're grateful now for this time together and for each person gathered around these tables. We ask that you be with us in our conversations because we are your grateful people. And all God's grateful people said, Amen. Well, again, I want to thank Diane for inviting me here to Lunch and Learn, and Diane asked me to share something that I was passionate about. And in the past few years, the work of intergenerational family storytelling has really been my focus and my mission. And when I say family, I define that broadly as our church family, our nuclear families, and the family of God. We're all included in the family. And my ministry has developed into being intentional about helping families and congregations and groups share stories and memories and encouraging the development of good conversations and good listening. So in the next few minutes, my hope is to highlight for you the importance of the gift of stories, and we're going to look at how intentional storytelling, conversation, and listening builds community in our church culture and our family culture. And then I'm going to give you some practical hands-on ideas for gathering of friends and families just in time for the holidays. We're going to look at later the Family Supper Story Kit is a small narrative research initiative that I developed as when I was in one of my narrative theology classes, and we'll talk more about that later, and you all get to take one home to help with prompting conversation and storytelling. Jimmy Neal Smith has written, "We are storytellers. We live in a network of stories. There isn't a stronger connection between people than storytelling." As I started work on my doctorate of ministry in 2021, we were just coming out of the pandemic, and I think I was really influenced by wanting to connect, by wanting to look at research about keeping us together and talking. And so I wanted to look at how our personal stories intersect with the biblical stories of God's presence in our spiritual formation our whole life long. And these just got put in here today. So a little bit of story about me is that as a 4-year-old, my father was a Presbyterian pastor, and I loved stories. I loved, in the church culture, coming down for the children's message and hearing the stories of the Bible, and then hearing how the story was woven into our family life. So that's me on my dad's knee there. That was at the First Presbyterian Church of Clarksville, Arkansas. There's a Presbyterian college there called the University of the Ozarks, and that was my dad's, one of his calls. And so that was a long time ago. And part of the story is I always said, I don't think I'll be a pastor, and I don't think I'll marry a pastor, because I wasn't. So the story, though, has changed in that regard. And then the other picture is my mom, who always told us stories. This is especially at birthdays, we would recount our birth stories and stories about the years. And so I'm the oldest of 3, and my younger brother Bob and Scott, who we call Scooter, and it was Bob's 9th birthday, I think, and we were celebrating, and that was always a wonderful time to hear stories. And then there's a couple more pictures here. Now we tell Alex stories and have told him, and our story now includes all of you here at First Presbyterian Church, Birmingham. And we also have a picture of Angus, who you've all heard about, and we have lots of stories about him. All right, and then Alex, I'm embarrassing him. That's one of my favorite ones, of him in the pumpkin patch. So there's stories about that. You can skip. You can go to the next one. So those are just a few little stories about me. But my hope is that we are intentional about fostering a storytelling culture. And the power of storytelling in intergenerational faith formation is so important. We share stories, and they become a rich pathway of growing together. So we want to encourage mealtime together for families of all shapes and sizes, and for friend groups, and have opportunities to combat the effects of loneliness and isolation that many people feel. So sharing a meal and conversation with others is good for our health. The doctors find that when we eat together, we have better health from the meals that we eat together. People eat more fruits and vegetables. And then the gift of talking with each other really even affects us neurologically. So we're going to talk about some of those things. So we're going to do so I'm going to have you, this is more of a workshop today. You're going to get the chance to talk a little bit, and we're going to just do some easy question and answers so we can get to know each other. And so I have also over on the table over there some different ideas that you may gather to use in telling stories and having conversations. And one of the things I brought is called a thumb ball. It's very easy, especially for folks that have grandkids or younger kids in the family, aunts and uncles. And this is a neat item. You just throw it, and wherever your thumb lands, that's the question that you can answer. Or I'll let Alex catch it, and then you're all going to get to turn to a partner and answer the question. So Alex, get a good question here. You ready?
Something you can draw.
So let's try one other one. Okay. Ready?
Favorite toy or game?
Okay. So what I'd like you all to do is turn to someone, or groups of 2 or 3, and what I'd like you to do is think about when you were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, what was your favorite toy and why? Can you sort of get in touch with that memory? Favorite toy or game when you were young? How about that? This is wide open. I hope that sort of evoked some memories and some different stories. You were all getting into your storytelling. Did it remind you of anything you hadn't thought of in a long time? That's really a neat idea. Joan came up. It was sort of already sparked some memories in her to talk about a story. And so it's an idea to use intergenerationally too. You can ask anybody, what's your favorite toy or game, and then tell about yours. And you have a connection, an immediate connection. And so this thumb ball is really great for just sort of icebreakers and getting started. But again, in looking at cultivating a storytelling culture, storytelling isn't so much a program or an activity, but a culture, a way of interacting. And if we look to story from our faith perspective, we're called to be people of the story. We're part of God's unfolding narrative and the yet to be written future. The story is still unfolding. So some of the ways we cultivate storytelling at home and at church include informal ways, sort of like when we're preparing meals and we can talk together, or a great place with teens is in the car, going back and forth. And then in the church, we have some more formal times like Bible studies or book clubs, time together now at Lunch and Learn. But God speaks when we're sharing our stories with each other and listening to each other. And I think someone here preached last week on Moses and standing on holy ground. So when we are sharing our stories, we too are standing on holy ground, sacred place. So just an idea to be thinking about as we talk more today. Where are places that you share stories in this church, in this congregation? So the function of stories, we're going back one there to the, have been researched, especially at Emory University by Lazarus and Fivish and Duke, a professor, not Duke University, but a professor, last name Duke, and they have looked at how important family stories are for identity and belonging. And so some of the things that they've said the function of stories is to remember, to create belonging and identity, to teach, to develop a family culture, and I added a church family culture, to connect generations, and to present a theme. So even a theme, if it's in the church of stewardship season, maybe we'll be telling stories of sharing gifts. And sometimes Lou does a children's sermon that connects the theme to the larger sermon. And so we tell stories for many different reasons, but they function in so many different ways in our lives. And so telling our stories matters. And Chuck DeGroat is a spiritual director, and I found out he's from Western Michigan, as a Western Seminary in Michigan here, and he has written quite a bit on sharing stories. And he has written that we are hardwired for stories, that science has found that our very neurobiology is shaped and wired by the stories we hear. And we bond when we listen to stories. I always like it when there's a story, or Lou even reads scripture and he'll say, lean in and listen. That's what children do when they're hearing a story with a parent. They'll lean in to listen and look at the pictures. But we thrive when we listen and tell, and without it we settle for a life of reactivity and not reflecting. And so story is healthy because it helps us reflect on our lives. We are meaning makers. For hundreds and hundreds of years, story was the fundamental building block of civilization. It was the way we passed along tradition and family tales and myths. The oral tradition was how we learned. Sitting around campfires, and the keeper of the stories recounted the deeds of the ancestors to generations to pass down and pass down and pass down. And today, our meaning happens in very different ways. We are so compartmentalized and bombarded by information 24/7 through technology. And so busyness and individualism, consumerism, they've redefined what's important in culture and society. So story can redirect us back to what is important. We are a wounded people. We are a part of the human family. That means we have hurts and pain and grief and broken places that happen in our bodies and in our hearts. Story can help heal us. One example I read about recently was after the Rwandan genocide, therapists went to Rwanda to offer healing. They wanted to use the latest techniques and theories for healing trauma. And but what they found is that, and they realized their fancy psychological techniques did not really help. What they realized was what gave solace was telling stories, was the groups sitting around in a circle, and they found healing and hope in old-fashioned group storytelling. It was as men, women, and children sat together and told their stories, healing and forgiveness took place. So story is so important for healing. And we are storied beings. The Judeo-Christian religion has been passed down through stories. We believe in actual events, real and felt, and we are rooted in narrative, God's story and our story. We're always mindful of the command to remember the story. And Jesus came to tell us stories, and he told us stories, but he was the story. And the Old and New Testament are stories of God's presence and faithfulness to all God's people. We are a liturgical people. Each week in worship, we come together to retell and remember and even rehearse the great story of God's love. The call to worship, the confession, the assurance of pardon, the reading of Scripture, the word preached, the Lord's Supper, the Lord's Prayer, and the benediction that sends us out. In this movement, the whole biblical story is told. It's intentional. We re-story our lives each week, and we reweave and reconnect us to the great grand story of God's love. And finally, we are commanded. The Bible commands us to tell stories to our children and to remember. Again and again in Scripture, God rescued people are told to remember. The Israelites are commanded to remember and were given the Shema to tell the stories of God's faithfulness to their children. Christians are given the Lord's Supper meal and commanded to repeat in remembrance of Jesus. And it's a ritual of telling and listening each and every week. It helps us remember our story, and it's a rhythm that can change our hearts and even rewire our brains. One of those commandments is in Psalm 78, where we read, "My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things from of old, things we have heard and known." And then in bold, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide from our descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. So we have said that identity and belonging are important human needs, and we gain a sense of these things through story, both our story in God and our family stories. So stories matter, and it is so important in faith formation. And it matters for several reasons. As we said, our identities are shaped by story. It's how we learn. And our lives are connected by stories. You had some connections here already when we were just talking about toys. And then the third thing, our faith is grown through stories. Stories shared in relationship. And when you think about the biblical stories and the relationships of families, Timothy learned about faithfulness from his mother and grandmother, and Ruth learned about hope from her mother-in-law. Jacob learned about the power of forgiveness from his brother. Their relationships were shaped, and their faith was shaped by stories. And through their stories, we learn about faith too. And then don't forget Jesus, as we said, he knew how to harness the power of a good story. Think of the prodigal son and the Good Samaritan. Jesus taught with story. And every one of us is born into a story, and they shape, connect, and spur us to growth. Thomas More wrote a book called Care of the Soul, and he was a former monk, and he's a psychotherapist, and he said that through storytelling, we get in touch with our soul. That's a pretty big thing, through story, that we get in touch with our soul. They're signposts in our lives. They're doors and windows into understanding. I have a picture from Scotland of a doors and windows there. They are turning points. They're paths of renewal and positive change. They're sources of strength and feeling connected. So your story and God's story is your spiritual autobiography. And our stories and memories are sacred stories. The everyday things about our lives, our births, deaths, adoptions, weddings, graduations. They're nodal events in our lives, and they intersect with the sacred stories of the Bible, God's companionship, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God's people on a journey. So we don't have time today in a gathering like this, but we could have another class where we could talk specifically about what events have shaped who you are or who we are. I could ask you to write down 10 to 15 major events in your life that have shaped you, that were important to you. And then I could ask you to pick one of those things. You might say it was the birth of my little brother, or the death of a loved one. And then I could ask you to tell a story to me about that. And that is a very deep way to get to the sacred moments in our lives. So everyone has a story, and what's yours? And so today we're going to try another little storytelling activity, and you can go to the next one, Alex. And it's a very simple thing, but it really can help us get to know each other. And this is something that we have done as a family at the dinner table every evening. And of course, sometimes we all don't get to eat dinner together. Sometimes it's breakfast. Sometimes it's a snack in the car. But the times together. And we always try to say, what was the best thing that happened to you today? And what was the worst? And if someone didn't feel like answering that, they did not have to. And if you couldn't answer something in the last 24 hours, you could think about the week, what was the best and what was the worst. And Lou and I have worked with youth, and we sometimes use different phrases. What's the good and the bad of the day? What's the high and the low? Is it a thumbs up day or a thumbs down day? And then my favorite with the teens, is it the happies and what was the crappies? What's the best? And then some people I like use it, the rose and the thorn. What was the beauty of the day? What was the sort of ouch of the day? And then when you use a rose, you can have the added bonus of the bud. What is a place that you saw hope? So this is something I'm going to ask you all to do, is turn to your conversation partner and talk about what's the best thing that happened to you today or in the last 24 hours. And if you have time, you can mention what was one of the worst things that has happened. And so let's take some time now and talk about that. What's the best thing and the worst thing? Okay, did everybody get a chance? Does anybody need more time? I'm going to call you back together. It's fun to talk, isn't it? Fun to converse. But in this simple question, I think it's a very profound question, especially when we're checking in with people, because you've just heard some things that you can pray for others about. You can share in their joys and their concerns and keep them in prayer, especially when we're working with children and young people. We can hear what's going on in their lives and use that. But then in any age, we are finding out about the needs of people, and it's really a way of saying, how can I be praying for you? Really connects us to our soul. So that's just another technique. You've got the thumb ball, you've got what is the best thing and worst thing that's happened, and we're going to talk about some more later on. So go to the next slide. So we've been saying storytelling builds community and a strong family culture. So storytelling, and I use that interchangeably with conversation, and then hand in hand with that, along with telling stories and good conversation, is listening. Everybody needs a turn. Everybody needs to be heard. And my favorite Presbyterian minister, Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, said that listening is a very active awareness of the coming together of at least two lives. Listening, as far as I'm concerned, is certainly a prerequisite of love. one of the most essential ways of saying I love you is being a receptive listener. And then also, Dave Isay, who is the founder of StoryCorps. Does anybody know about StoryCorps? Have heard of, yeah, some of you have. A wonderful program, initiative to have people tell their stories and their memories and be heard. And Isay says in his conversational style that our stories and the stories of everyday people are as interesting and as important as the celebrity stories we're bombarded with in the media every minute of the day. That if we take time to listen, we'll find wisdom, wonder, and poetry in the lives and stories of people all around us. That we will want to know our lives have mattered and we won't ever be forgotten. We all want to know that listening is an act of love.
Interesting last name for somebody who tells stories.
I pronounced Isay, yes. And we're going to hear his voice actually here in a minute. He talks about the profound impact an interview can have on people, especially those who thought their story didn't matter. So StoryCorps originally put up a sound booth in Grand Central Station and invited passersby to go into the booth with a partner and ask questions and be recorded. And they have a great questions list, which some of them are included on the yellow sheets that you'll all be getting a copy of today. And there were parents and children interview. He is very keen on children interviewing the older family members, and even strangers interviewed each other. And the interviews are recorded, and one copy is always sent to the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. And StoryCorps has the largest collection of personal narratives ever compiled. And you can listen to them on weekly podcasts and broadcasts of NPR Morning Edition. StoryCorps takes different booths around to state fairs and different large gatherings so that people can have time to do a 5-minute interview. But also, it's now an app on your phone. You can look up StoryCorps app in the App Store and download that. And they always encourage every Thanksgiving, they call it the Great Thanksgiving Listen. And they want kids at the Thanksgiving dinner time, it's usually an intergenerational gathering, that holiday, and encourage children to ask all the people at the table different stories to be interviewed. And they provide the questions on the app. And it's very fun to explore the app on your phone. So they also, other than the Great Thanksgiving Listen, they have several different initiatives, and they pair conversation partners together. And right now, in this last few years, they have been doing political discourse in asking people on opposite sides. They assign you a partner across the country, and you talk to someone whose views are the opposite of yours, and they provide the questions. And it's to be done in a civil and gentle way to find out about another person's life and why they believe the way they do. So that's something you could all sign up for if you wanted. And it's very interesting to me, all the different topics that they explore. So if you get a chance, please look up StoryCorps. But this idea of youth or young people interviewing the elders in their lives and finding out about their stories, it reminded me, I've even seen a Sunday school group for youth be interviewing the people in the church, the older adults, and that was their whole Sunday school curriculum for like 4 years. And it's something that could continue, and kids are so into media and technology. Might be a neat thing if we even started a story booth here and did interviews. Another thing that I have a heart for are the stories of many churches are closing in our denomination and other denominations. People just aren't attending. Last week, we were at the closing of a local congregation at Star Presbyterian, and there was within the worship service a time of telling stories, of people sharing their memories. It was beautiful. Ken had a memory to share there too. So I just think would be a really neat initiative for our Presbyterian denomination also to go to churches that are closing and start interviews and collecting the stories so that we don't lose those stories. So that's just some ideas of how we can be a more storytelling culture in the church. But within our families, we also want you all to keep practicing telling stories. And another one of my favorite people is Madeline Langle, and she was the writer in residence at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, and she's written many books for children and adults on spirituality, and young adult novels and poems. And she has written, "If you don't recount your family history, it will be lost. Honor your own stories and tell them too. The tales may not seem very important, but they are what binds families and makes each of us who we are." And then also, sometimes, you can go to the next one, Alex. Family stories are not always beautiful, neatly packaged. There's pains and there's hurts. But we need to still talk about them, and appropriate to the age of who's hearing the stories. But Elaine Reese from New Zealand, who has studied children and stories, has written, "Leave in the funny bits, the sad bits, the gory and the smelly bits. Kids can tell when a story has been sanitized for their protection. Then invite everyone else to tell a story too. Don't forget the youngest and the oldest in the group. Their stories may not be as coherent, but they can be the truest and the most revealing." So this is just some questions to think about. We're not going to be able to answer them today, but something I just bring to your attention. How does your family share stories? How has it been done? How would you like to change it and be more intentional about telling family stories? In what ways does the First Pres Birmingham congregation cultivate a storytelling culture? I walk into church always a little late, and I see folks down here talking and spending time together. There are different ways that you already are a storytelling culture. And then how can we grow our families and congregation as storytelling cultures? I mentioned the youth Sunday school, but also just so important to remember meals together and in the car together. You have a time to tell stories. And I'm sure we have more ideas we could brainstorm. There's a few here. At church, in children's ministry, we have so many opportunities. We could have a time of testimony. That word testimony is loaded, but we can tell about things that are important, things that we're grateful for. I know of a church that asks members right after the call to worship to get up and read a psalm and why that psalm is important to them. And that's also on there. And then at home, you could connect to the church even by reading favorite passages or stories and describe why it's your favorite. And tell your children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, friends, stories from your school days, good and bad. And share stories of times that you struggled and how God brought you through. Okay. And again, there's those doors and windows. Those are times to be open to growth. And so now these questions go a little bit deeper than the thumb ball and the best and worst thing that happened today. And those are questions that are all on the yellow sheets that are on the center of your tables. You're all going to get a copy of those questions today. But I'm going to ask you now just to take a moment before we finish up and talk about the storytelling kits. You can pick one of those questions to tell your conversation partners. So you have a wide range. What character in the Bible is your favorite and why? Who's been an influential person in your life and why? What's special about the neighborhood you grew up in or the one you live in now? What's the silliest, craziest gift you've ever received? And what might be the title of your memoir or a movie about your life? So pick the one that appeals to you and share that with your conversation partners. All right, I hate to, did everybody get an opportunity to share? And maybe we can take some time after if we didn't get a chance. But just a reminder that in our conversations and being together, storytelling and conversation and listening, really listening, connects us and strengthens us. It's a bond that keeps us together. And the next thing that we're going to talk about is the storytelling kit. Go to the next one. And we have 30 of these made up. So, one per family, or if you need extras, we can make them. We have a sign up if there's not enough today that you can get more. But this family supper story kit is just in time for the holidays. It has been shown that at Thanksgiving, that we mentioned, the generations are together more than any other day of the year. And it's also the day, despite sort of the script of the matriarch or the mother of the family having to do a lot of cooking and getting ready, it's a time when usually the matriarch of the family sits down after the meal and there's time together. And it has been researched that women do provide the family stories, especially on Thanksgiving, and that's a very important day, whether we were aware of it or not, to be together and to tell stories. So I hope that you will be able to use this Thanksgiving or Christmas or any holiday, or anytime. I know some people that keep one under their car seat, and pull it out to ask questions. But part of my graduate school class was Narrative Theology for Leadership, an initiative at the United Theological Seminary, the Twin Cities. And I was, by the way, Phil Reed told me, who had been your interim, told me he had taught there for a while. But the initiative that I did was for community building. And it is not just a Judeo-Christian type story kit, it's for everyone, interreligious groups and families, but it was field tested at the Gettysburg Presbyterian youth group with their families back in the fall of 2021. And I have had an evaluation to gather information on the project. But I have many wonderful stories from youth that reported about it and their parents. But what blew me away was when I presented it to my doctoral class, the students of all faiths who work in faith-based organizations and churches and congregations and synagogues and mosques, they all wanted a resource like this to offer their families. So I just want to look at some of the things that are in it that you can take with you today. And the kit is mostly copies of paper, and there's some story prompts and conversations. As I said, the yellow paper on the center of your table, you can pass that around and ask folks questions. They can pick a question, or you can cut those into strips and put them in a basket, and people can draw out a question. Sometimes at Thanksgiving when kids are busy, need something to do before the meal, they can get that ready. Also included in your kit is the Do You Know survey. And Alex, you can go to the next one. And you can go to the next one. The Do You Know survey is 20 questions about family stories. And it's a scale that has been developed over 30 years of research out of Emory University on the Family Narratives Project. And they were looking at the mental health of children and families. And they found that these 20 questions are one of the best predictors of resilience and mental health capabilities in children when they know their history. And there are sometimes things that are hard that we don't know the answer to, but it is the family that you are with, that we have adoptive families, we have foster families, but these help us to know about our history and help us gain a sense of who we are. And there's questions on there like, do you know where your grandparents went to high school? And it gives you the bigger picture. It seems silly, but it gives you the bigger picture of connection. There's even one at the bottom, do you have somebody in the family where there's a silly story, something like whose face froze in a position, there's always those family myths in stories too. So those are, the green sheet in your bag are important, especially when you're for the kids in your family, to learn about the family history. So that's in there. There's also a gratefulness game. The gratefulness game is in there for Thanksgiving or any time, and that's a game where you can just cut up the slips of paper and people can write I'm thankful for, put them in a basket, pass that around and have someone pull out something and I'm grateful for, and then guess who wrote that, and that's always a fun thing to do. There is a little post-it notepad in there for writing family, to write down love notes and put them places and hide those like on the mirror in different places. And there is a tea light in there, so a little reminder to let your light shine. You can pass that around the table for the person speaking, could have the light with them. And then also there are some ideas for children's crafts. There's, Lou, do you want to show there? There's how to make a talking stick. Many of you know that in indigenous cultures, a talking stick was used around the circle, and it was your turn to talk when you were holding the talking stick. And that's one way it helps us learn to take turns and to listen. And so there's some sticks over there and some stuff if you're feeling crafty and want to make a talking stick today, you can do that. Then there's also ideas on how to make a gratitude tree. You can put kids to work on as you're getting ready for a meal together. And then the last thing in the kit is the Family Conversations Guideline. And it's something just to make sure before you begin questions that you just always, you can go ahead and go to the next one. Next one too is, keep going, is to read these guidelines, is a conversation covenant, because it's just important. We want to listen well and have everybody there agree that they'll listen to others and not interrupt, and refrain from side conversations, to be attentive and practice positive presence, no name-calling, complaints, or mean-spirited comments. And I know that, that sometimes that's a hard thing to do. If a prompt doesn't seem appropriate at the time, you can choose a different one. And then be a team. Make sure each person has a turn to answer a prompt or tell a story. And most of all, I just want folks to enjoy these activities. And then down at the bottom are some ideas for managing tech at the table. Sometimes, people want to have their phone right there. And sometimes we also keep a look it up later list. Some people sometimes want to fact check, that's a big thing right now. And when we're doing family conversations, we can make a list to say, we'll look that up later. But another good-natured competition is we can assure people they're going to be able to get back to their phones. And sometimes we say if the first person to touch their phone does the dishes. So that's one thing you can do. And that usually helps a lot. So the other thing in your kit is a list of resources you can read through. I have a list of different games and apps and books and community programs. There's different articles and podcasts and children's picture books that they're all listed on there, and you can look through those as you see fit. And then let's see, the next slide is just some of the kits that were ready for distribution as they are today. These are some of the families that took part. And I remember one third grade boy said to me, it was never a dull moment hearing my grandpa tell stories. And he was just elated. And even my hairdresser at the time took a kit home, and she said, I heard stories from my uncle that I never knew. He doesn't usually talk much. And the right-hand corner is a family. The grandmother is 90 years old, and she pulled out her iPad that had pictures that went along with the story. And it was just, it was a very, she had to do the dishes. She pulled out her iPad. And so that was just I have lots of little anecdotes about the time that families spent together with the stories. And I even had people in my own family my sister-in-law wanted to take one to her family. I had an aunt that wanted to use it for her kids when she was traveling at Christmas. So I hope that they will be something that is enthusiastic for you too. Alex, you can go to the next one. And there's our family at Thanksgiving that year. There is Alex in the back holding up the questions, and my mom to the right by the window, and my niece and nephew. My younger brother Scott is sitting at the head of the table, and his wife, my two aunts are at the right, my Aunt Bobby and my Aunt Nancy. My mom's the oldest of 5 girls. So there's lots of stories there. And then Lou, that was before he got his hair cut, before he moved to Michigan. And and he was getting ready for another piece of pie there. That was we really enjoyed doing the family questions that day, and have done them since and have different variations. So I encourage you to tell family stories or friendship stories, whoever you're with. I think about where we could send these questions. We can send them to places that provide community meals. We could send them home with the Alcott food, maybe we would write different questions, but they could go home with schools and feeding programs. And so I hope you'll brainstorm with me ways that we might be able to use these resources. All right. So I just want to thank you for coming today and learning more about the gift of sharing your story. I hope you'll use these resources, and then let me know how it went. I'd love to have coffee with you and hear your story and find out about how this resource worked with you. And we just remember from 1 Thessalonians, because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. And so, go now in peace to tell stories and have conversations.